For our last paper today, we will hear from Timothée Valentin, who is a PhD candidate at Penn State University, where he is writing his dissertation on the rise of the Guadeloupean workers' movement at the turn of the 20th century. He recently re-edited and introduced an 1899's novel from Guadeloupean novelist Sully Lara, La fiancée du maître de l'école, ou d'école, in the collection Autrement même. Today, he is presenting a preliminary project that considers French rap as an effective and creative lens for analyzing alternative discourses on national identity and belonging that have been produced in France and its overseas department since the mid-1980s. His paper, entitled Black M Cancelled at Verdun, Excluding Rap from French Memorialization, suggests that despite an ever-growing commercial success, rappers still appear at odds with French identity. Timothée.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christy. Thank you all for your paper. They were really great, and it's a pleasure to talk about rap and music I grew up with during the 90s. So, on May 29, 2016 took place the commemoration of the centenary of the Battle of Verdun. This commemoration willingly targeted the younger generation, whether French or German. For the occasion, a concert of Black M, a highly popular French rapper of Guinean descent, a member of the rap band Section d'Assaut that Paroma talked about, was organized. So this concert was organized by the socialist mayor of Verdun, Samuel Hazard. This was apparently an idea of the president, François Hollande, and this concert was organized and was perceived to thank the French and German teenagers who participated to that ceremony. It was, as such, it was not part of the official commemoration. However, Hazard, so the mayor of Verdun, decided to cancel this concert on May 13. In the meantime, Black M had become a target for far-right activists and politicians who described him as anti-French, anti-Semitic, and homophobic, which is kind of a paradox for the far-right. But what interests me in this paper is not necessarily the polemic affair Black M, but rather what it says about belonging and identity in 2016 France for Afro-descendants French like Black M. Through a focus on this affair, I will highlight the tensions experienced by the latter between a desire of belonging to France and an ever-growing suspicion of anti-French sentiments. So first, I will briefly describe the events and the reason that led to this cancellation. Second, I will focus on the reaction of Black M after the cancellation, and finally, I will just categorize the critics to better understand what the organization and the cancellation of these concerts mean. So let's first start by summing up the events. So the first public mention that I found about this concert appeared on May 9th, 2016, when L'Est Républicain, so a local newspaper, published an interview of Black M. When asked about what he would say to those who were surprised by this concert, he just answered, "Je les invite à venir me voir." Oops, sorry. Je les invite à venir me voir. Qu'ils aiment ou pas ma musique, on va s'amuser. Which is quite an unfortunate sentence for such a somber commemoration. So on May 10, the far-right blog Français de Souche, F de Souche, which described itself as a nationalist whistleblower, launched the polemic, denouncing Black M as homophobic, anti-Semitic, and anti-French. In fact, and they dig through his lyrics to prove that. In fact, the first accusation, homophobia, is based on lyrics that were written by other members of his band Section d'Assaut. The second, anti-Semitism, is based on a song by Doug Gineco that he covered, and he actually blurred, like there was a beep when there was this anti-Semitic slur in that song. And the third accusation, anti-French, is just based on one line of a song from Section d'Assaut, Désolé, which was a highly commercial success in 2012, in which Black M called France un pays de couffards. So Marion Maréchal Le Pen, who had declared in 2015 that she really liked to listen to Section d'Assaut, declared that this word, couffard, is, and I quote, un terme très péjoratif signifiant mécréant, utilisé dans la propagande anti-occidentale de Daesh. And I'll come back to that point a bit later. So the publication of F de Souche became viral on social medias within what's called the fascosphere, which is a generic term that the media use to encompass the different networks of far-right online activism. On May 11, many newspapers echoed this polemic, as well as the main leaders of the Front National, and some politicians from Le Républicain, so the right-wing party. For instance, Marion Maréchal Le Pen on Twitter largely shared this tweet and this picture that opposed the poilu that you can see on the top left with black M, as if the two were impossible to reconcile. A hashtag, Verdun sans black M, had also been created and used largely by those who opposed this concert. You can also see the mention of the Rassemblement Bleu Marine at the bottom, making this an official publication of the FN, and thus there is an attempt for the Front National to political recuperation of the polemic that was first launched by F de Souche. This image and hashtag will be then largely shared on social medias, as well as some articles that were produced by mainstream medias on May 11 and 12. In this publication, then the arguments of F de Souche, which is a pretty small blog, but still, which is so the alleged anti-French attitude of Black M, are really put forward, and never was the term of kuffar so widely discussed within France's conservative circles. In the meantime, Samuel Hazard, the socialist mayor of Verdun, received a high volume of threats, whether by email or phone, and this includes explicitly racist comments. For instance, a woman told him that si ça avait été white M, ça n'aurait pas posé de problème. Thus, on May 13, Hazard, concerned about possible disruption to public order, announced the cancellation of the concert. The far-right celebrated this cancellation as a victory, and I'll use a few quotes from Gilles Penel, who is a socialist member of the Front National and a local councillor in Brittany. And he actually shared those on a video that was posted on his Facebook page on May 13. This rhetoric is of particular interest as Penel explicitly linked his struggle to oppose this concert and that the struggle of the poilus during World War I, both against a seemingly powerful enemy. So German troops in 1916 and what he called l'idéologie dominante a century later without really defining it. So this is important because this dualism between patriots and their opponents, whoever they are, socialists, rappers, really structure the political activism of the far right. So now I'm going to move to Black M. I'll just introduce him briefly. So Black M appears as particularly inoffensive for a rapper. Indeed, he never claimed to be politicized, and his music in 2016 was not even perceived as being as actual rap. The website Le Rap en France actually described his album, his 2014 album, as, and I quote, un concentré de mots sans sens, de paroles sans envergure, de flots sans entrain, et surtout, de chansons sans rap. So Black M has this image of mainstream artist within the rap sphere who achieved success with the younger generation. And for instance, in 2016, he was even voted as the 5th favorite celebrity by the readers of the Journal de Mickey. And for those who don't know, they're between 7 and 14 years old. So in other words, in 2016, Black M had become a pop star. He reacted in 2 moments to that polemic. First, on May 13, 2016, he posted on Facebook a picture of his grandfather, tirailleur sénégalais during World War II, as well as a message to commend the polemic. In this post, Black M found itself justifying his belonging to France and his attachment to the Republic and its principles. by adding a picture of his grandfather and talking about him, is also like demonstrating that his family's attachment to France goes back at least to 2 generations. When being asked what this polemic reveals about France, he answered, "T'es black, tu réussis à être populaire, tu deviens populaire, et on te cherche des histoires, et en plus, t'es rappeur." Thus highlighting the difficulty of French black men and women to fit in the French identity. In August 2016, Black M will provide a musical answer with the song Je suis chez moi, a song that can hardly be described as rap, at least in my opinion, in which he declared his belonging to France in different ways, while at the meantime mocking Marion Maréchal Le Pen. In the video, we can see him dancing with a young Marion in front of a pretty multicultural crowd. We also can see him with another rapper, Youssoupha, that you all talked about, wearing a t-shirt claiming justice pour Adama. This image would actually be blurred on public TV when the video is played, and that refers of course to the murder of Adama Traoré by the police that happened a few weeks before on July 19, 2016. So in this song, Black M claimed his belonging to France. One can see that as a political gesture, but also as a form of public apology for his words. There might be indeed a need to reaffirm his attachment to France, and also the polemic might have been a threat for his career. But he's really also promoting a multiculturalist France. Finally, I will move to a few examples of insults and threats addressed to Black M on his Facebook wall. I've arranged them in 4 categories: explicit racism, threats, anti-Frenchness, and blaming the socialist government. I'll just look at the last 2. So these comments were not just addressed to Black M, but also to Hollande's socialist government. And indeed, I have found 2 main categories of critics to oppose Black M concert at Verdun, and I've chosen 2 comments that were posted on Facebook to categorize them. So first, le souci, ce n'est pas que tu sois noir, mais que tu craches sur la France. I mentioned the first one earlier when stating that F. de Souche denounced Black M as anti-Semitic, homophobic, and anti-French. That he used the term kuffar in the song is problematic in 2016 because we're a few months after the Paris attacks and a bit more than a year after the Paris attacks of November 2015 and the attack on Charlie Hebdo and the Hypermarché Cacher. So Black M explained that he was not sure in 2010 about the meaning of this word, and as he had tended to say, un pays qui se voile la face. Désolé was released in 2010. It even became a hit, actually the first for Section d'Assaut in 2012, and the mention of kuffar then went unnoticed. And Marion Maréchal Le Pen, who really liked him, didn't say anything about that. Furthermore, in the verse, Black M tells himself that j'ai pas la foi, thus taking his distance from religion in some way. This means that the so-called whistleblowers of F. de Français de Souche only thought for a reason to oppose the coming of Black M at Verdun by really digging through his lyrics. And the accusation of anti-Frenchness is thus more an assumption than an actual fact, which is a technique that is not very surprising for the far right. And as you all say, like the suspicion of rappers actually goes back to the early 90s with bands like NTN, Ministère Amer, but also La Rumeur or Sniper. All of them were sued for their lyrics. Furthermore, as my colleague already mentioned, rap became the main musical genre in France during the 2010s. And despite its commercial success, rap still remains at odds with the so-called national identity. I'm gonna move to the second category, and I call this « On ne commémore pas les centaines de milliers de victimes de Verdun avec un concert ». So this category focuses on the choice of a concert within the commemoration. More than Black M, it's mostly the Parti Socialiste, and François Hollande that is targeted. Many right-wing politicians and journalists articulated this critique. For instance, Christian Jacob, who is the actual president of Les Républicains, wondering whether il y a besoin d'un concert de rap pour célébrer le 100e anniversaire de la bataille de Verdun, declared without any more explanation, j'en suis pas convaincu. I could use more examples, but for the sake of time, I'll just look at a few reactions from historians and one hip-hop specialist. So French historian Nicolas Lebourg declared, un concert de variété, quel que soit le chanteur, représente une incompréhension totale de ce qu'est le lieu de mémoire Verdun. He added that considering this cancellation as a victory of the far right, which was the claim of the Secretary of State of Veterans Jean-Marie Todeschini, but also of the National Front, the Front National, revealed, and I quote, la compréhension foncière de ce que constitue une commémoration en tant que moment d'entretien des lieux de mémoire qui a amené à choisir un concert de variété, là où il eût fallu un dispositif dont le sens s'inscrivait dans le référentiel établi. Nicolas Offenstadt shared this analysis when pointing on France Inter that il y a eu une déconnexion entre le concert de Black M et la commémoration. Il fallait connecter le concert, la musique et la mémoire, et non pas en faire un spectacle en dehors de ça. However, for Offenstadt, l'idée d'utiliser la musique est non seulement une évidence, mais je dirais l'un des seuls moyens d'élargir le public des commémorations and as such a really good way to attract the young people to get interested in the memory of Verdun. This point is also highlighted in a different manner by some specialists of hip-hop, for instance the journalist Bertrand Dical, when he talked about the political motivation behind the concert of Black M, he said, in a kind of provocative way, regardez, on and on stands for the government, regardez, on est ouvert, regardez, on pense aux jeunes, regardez, on pense à la transmission intergénérationnelle, regardez, on fête le 100e anniversaire de la bataille de Verdun, mais on ne sait pas trop quoi faire, et on a vraiment l'impression que comme on ne sait pas comment parler à la jeunesse, comme on ne sait pas comment parler au quartier, on va faire venir un chanteur. Et on allait chercher Black M, parce que les mômes aujourd'hui, ils aiment Black M. On a vraiment l'impression qu'ils se sont dit, tiens, on va prendre un noir gentil, celui-là, on est sûr qu'il ne dit jamais rien de mal. Dical thus highlights the political opportunism behind the organization of this concert from the socialists, as well as the lack of understanding of French politicians of the younger generations and of the banlieue. So to conclude, I just have a really brief remark. I'm really interested in this affair because to me it really sums up the rise of the far-right ideas and the weakness also of the political left to fight and to produce like a counter-discourse against those racist ideas. That in 2016, that a black French asked to proclaim in a song that is French really demonstrate the droitisation, so the slippage toward the right of French political discourses. Thank you very much.
We're going to open up to the floor for questions. And if you would, please identify yourself before you ask your question.
Please use the microphone so it shows up on the recording.
Yes, it won't amplify you, actually.
So a comment and question for Timothée, but maybe that could speak for everyone in a sense. So the first thing, I just have kind of an observation. So Black M's kind of thoughtless comment about like, oh, on va s'amuser, you know, at Verdun, sure, like you pointed out, it does seem like a thoughtless comment, but it kind of makes me think like about double standards. and that, it was, anyone could make a thoughtless comment fairly easily, and that it seemed like there were people really waiting in the wings ready to just kind of jump. So the sort of double standard and having to prove, and that was obviously supported by the fact that he even wrote Je suis chez moi, having to continuously prove his belonging. And so then I was also thinking the fact that the concert was canceled and had a lot of opponents from really opposing political ideas, I think is interesting and kind of reminds me of the controversy surrounding the Moissy Festival in 2017 in Paris by the Afro-feminist group. Different context, but you had, far-right criticism, but you also had criticisms on the left for, communautarisme and ultimately, I think she canceled part of it. Well, anyway, who was a socialist mayor. So I guess my point is, with these attacks kind of coming from all sides, do you think it kind of brings out this sort of liminal position, or sort of, kind of underscores the fact that, where is the belonging, right? So, yeah, just kind of wanted to, so that could kind of apply to anyone, but the fact that the criticisms, from overt racism to these other types of debates, it's just, where is this all fitting in? Yeah. Sorry, that was a little bit of a messy question, but voilà.
Thank you very much for your question, Liz. I think I just think I think the kind of sums up that's pretty well this idea of we want to do something to talk to the banlieue, but we don't really know what to do, and then we'll throw in this concert, and it seems like it was organized at the very last minute. At least less than a month before the commemoration. Just give me they didn't really know what to do. They want to please the youth. They probably look at the charts and be like, oh, he's available, and let's have him on the schedule. I know that Soprano, another famous rapper, actually commented and said he was contacted, but he refused. Black M was also heavily criticized for getting paid, and the far right used the fact that he was getting something like 150,000 euros for the concert, which I don't know where those numbers are from. But yeah, with your to get to the point with your comparison with the Moissy meeting in Paris, I think it's just it's a bit different, because Black M is not Black M is very mainstream in many ways. I'm sorry, I'm just processing, but but I think the problem is that they really used that term, and they saw that that would make them unpopular, and it's also the strength of the propaganda from the far right. Well, they will produce a very simplified discourse, especially in 2016, that is really close of the Paris attack, and they kind of jump on this Islamophobia that is existing in France at that time, to actually say look at that guy, he said that he's against us, we don't, and the socialists, and it was also a way to attack the socialists. They're inviting him to commemorate such a national event and a national tragedy that was Verdun, because Verdun is very special for in France's memory, and France's memory of the World War I. So yeah, I don't have a good answer, but that's pretty much what I want to say.
I'd like to say something, if that's okay. I think that the parties on the left, I think as Timothée pointed out very astutely, that they have a hard time coming back because they have a white supremacy problem. And so it's hard to find a universalist discourse when you are stuck in a mode of Eurocentricity yourself, and a lot of the, generationally, those in power now, well, Macron is quite young, but people, the end of the baby boomers, they are those 68 and they don't understand. This is just like a total personal anecdote, but my in-laws are in France and they're 75, and I said I'm going to talk about national identity and rap and hip hop, and they just went, I don't know what you would possibly have to say about that. and it occurred to me, and they were 68, they were living in like communautaire, they're very, very liberal politically, so it's kind of that there needs to be a new discourse that is encompassing of the colonial past, recognition. I mean, look at Taubira and how much resistance she gets, and from the historical community in France, right? When she was proposing the Loi Taubira, and people were saying, oh, we can't remake history now because we know better. And she's saying, no, we need to acknowledge this. And so these kinds of conversations need to happen. Thank you for the question. I also wanted to just say thank you to everybody for your amazing papers in this panel. It was amazing.
Do you want to say something? Can I add something? No, it's just I completely agree with both of you. I think it's just that basically there is no moral high ground. I think the marginalization is coming from all sides, and I can't remember the name of the rapper who said this, but someone said La France est un idéal qu'il faut sans cesse bâtir. So it's like something that's constantly evolving and still in construction, and it's not a fait accompli. So I think there isn't really a us versus them binary, except when the marginalization occurs, but who's doing that, I think, is kind of universal, actually.
I'm Genoé Vulbo from University of Lille. Thank you for your presentations. I've got a question for Ali and maybe a general comment. I was wondering about you get together PNL and others rappers that you quote, and I was wondering if PNL is not more interesting about the effects of capitalism and the destruction of our world through capitalism, and how the only choice we have is making money in this world, and even though they have this kind of cosmology also. So I was wondering about that. And also it's also interesting how those rappers that were engagé rappers are still part of the debate today about Islamo-gauchism and wokeism, that this kind of culture war we have in France right now. And for instance, Medine or Youssoupha are still part of they're considered as the roots of Islamo-gauchism somehow. So I think it's very interesting also. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Genoé, for the question. I think in the case of PNL and like the universe and like cosmology that they're like trying like to create like through their rap is something, as you said, like through their like kind of like spleen expression of like spleen, finding like a way out of like all like the society of like capitalism, like through their like criticism. But at the same time, I see their rap as not only kind of like pessimistic in that sense, but rather as like a force like to create something new. And I think the two last albums, Dans la légende and Deux Frères, like kind of like expresses like this idea, because they want like to move beyond, and they express it beyond like kind of the conditions that they were in. And they, as like for people who don't know, like they're like two brothers from the 9-1 who have like been dealing like drugs their whole life and like consecrated their life to rap like afterwards, and they're trying like to through like this kind of like dans la légende, like through like this idea of like moving beyond what has been like said about like capitalism and like what has been said about like the whole idea of like social classes, to kind of like create this kind of like idiosyncratic identity that like I see, where like they include also like Islam, when like Ademo says I start by Bismillah and my day by Amin, and all like this kind of like also very in some sense like very spiritual Quranic identity that moves beyond this kind of like only pessimistic and like spleen ideas that they're like developing through their songs. So I really see like a potential like to create something from this spleen that is like characteristic of like PNL and the whole thing.
So I'm John Monroe from Iowa State University, and so I'll say I'm coming at this. I came here precisely because I don't know anything about French hip-hop. This was really exciting for me from a teaching standpoint because this is the kind of thing I'd really like to add, you know, as I get to the present in my modern French history class. But the thing that struck me, though, I am a researcher of French colonial cultural policy between the two world wars, and especially, you know, in my last book, I in the final chapter, I looked at, you know, I found a bunch of archives about French craft and art schools in West Africa, in AOF, and it was very interesting. Those were, you know, colonial administration schools which worked to teach the African people in the colony how to make authentic art. Right? So they were teaching authenticity, you know, they were the French teaching authenticity to the colonized people, right? And I actually saw, it's interesting, in this panel, I see this kind of, on the one hand, like some kind of temporal change that has emerged, and that there's real continuity between that conception of authenticity, that idea that, okay, well, it is the privilege of universalism to define the other, and it's perfectly okay for you to be the other as long as you're the other on our terms, and we will then aestheticize you and find you unthreatening, right? But you have to be the other on our terms. You have to fulfill our requirements of authenticity in order to be accepted as a, you know, a suitably picturesque and non-threatening other, right? And I see that as like a, you know, a kind of continuity with the first three presentations, this kind of, the tension created by that idea of authenticity. And then we have Timothée, where, you know, I say this as someone who doesn't know anything about this music aside from what I've heard here, but Black M sounds like the most inoffensive, most safely authentic, or, you know, authentic in that sense of safely kind of other in a way that has been deemed assimilable by this model of, you know, this way in which the French universal aestheticizes the other, right? And yet here, he's rejected. So I'm wondering, and this is a question really for all of you, what's changed, right? Is there a rupture? Can we see a rupture in the rejection of the safe authenticity? You know, the authenticity that has been, you know, defined according to the terms of universalism. Can we see a rejection of that? And if so, what does that mean?
Do you want to start? I think it's interesting because if we look at Black M, oh, thank you so much. He is widely popular, but it's still a very dance genre. So for people of a certain age, it's still very othered. Whereas somebody maybe like Abdelmalik or Claude, aide-moi. You know, Claude, MC Solar, merci. I was like, it was not coming to me. MC Solar and Abdelmalik, I think those are kind of the properly aestheticized artists because they're poets and they put forth their poetry as their main aesthetic, and you could compare them to Rimbaud and you could compare them to Verdun, and those are the kind of connections that we want to see, right? And they're very good-looking men. I mean, I don't. That's my opinion, but you know, and they're very safe. They're very friendly. They're not aggressive. They're very poetic, and so I think they check the right boxes. But I think Black M, even though he's incredibly popular, I think he's still very othered as this kind of American culture, this sort of Americanization, this banalisation de la culture. I think he kind of fits in that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think Black M is actually, he's kind of representing this tendency for some rap artists to go viral and to be like really play on the radio. and it's more like a joyful music, and it's the idea is just to be happy, dance, etc. And also it moved from rap, what he was doing with Section d'Assaut, which was also already like quite mainstream, especially in the early 2010 or some around this time. But sorry, I lost my track of thought. But yeah, he's as you were saying, he's an offensive, but still that's not enough. And what struck me is like it's the Français de Chose it's just a blog, and the information they produce has been like spread like nationally, because the social medias like used this anti-French feeling that he might have at some point, which most of the rappers had at some point, and to attack him, to get to him. And as you were saying, like MC Solar in the 90s, Abdel Malik, are kind of like highly played on radio, and not just by radio that only play hip-hop music. And they reach to a wider audience. But Black M is more, it really targets the young people. But still that's not enough, and that makes me think, so as Christy said, I work on Guadeloupe, and after the abolition of slavery, you still have like this, even though the former enslaved got citizenship, it was kind of like a second-run citizenship. And to me, that I see the connection between the project I'm working in and French rapper, where to be of African descent, to be not like Français de souche actually, and in France today, it just makes you like kind of like a dubious citizen, and you still have to perform and to adhere to this idea of French universalism, secularism that you all talked about. I don't know if there is exactly a rupture at some point, but I would say like when rap became really popular in the late 2000s, I don't know, probably Paroma might know better than me, you get that also, like that that kind of like mainstream rap that is pretty. So it's a bit all over the place, but
I think I really see like a rupture with, as I tried like to explain, with this kind of like new generations of like rappers who are like emerging in the 2010s, and like the rappers that are like producing music at the moment, because like they refuse to be like these kinds of like exceptions that are like necessary to French universalism. They refuse like to play this role of being like this kind of like opposition that like necessary to a republic, to like kind of like a bill itself. And what they try to do, and I see it like particularly like with like the French language, how like they invest the French language, try to shape it differently, to introduce Verdun, to introduce words from like Arabic in it, from Lingala in it, and like try to make it like to make French like their own language, to kind of like decolonize and deconstruct French language itself, is like a way to kind of move from this kind of colonized identity that they're like always like embodying in the metropole itself, and the way in which today like Nepal, Nekfeu, PNL are trying like to kind of build this kind of idiosyncratic identity that moves beyond any kind of like dichotomy imposed by the Republic, and that is necessary to the Republic to exist, is a way to claim a certain idea that is really at the core of like this kind of like deconstruction of what the Republic was like always doing, and what is like still doing in that sense. And I think Black M response is a kind of like moving two words like claiming "Je suis français" is like already like a kind of like mistake, because like he plays like the role of like that the Republic wants him to play, saying that I'm this kind of like exception that is like needed to French to evolve.
It's kind of like trapped in this dialectical like dialogue with he needs to be recognized by his audience as French somehow, and people, I guess, like rappers like PNL, Nekfeu, others like the younger generation, and also some rappers from the 90s, they don't need that. They really talk to they already have their audience.
Could I think also there's a difference between citizenship and belonging, and at least when I was doing my research, it's very difficult to find information on citizenship, because that's obviously a very private thing. People don't openly declare, unless they want to, that they have a country's passport. But for example, Maître Gims, who's also, or actually Gims, who's part of Section d'Assaut with Black M, he was publicly made to reveal that he'd applied for French citizenship and been rejected, and he was trying to defend himself by saying there's no issue in being French and African, but somehow the host just didn't understand why he would need to be African anymore now that he could technically belong to France. And I think the visibility and the volume of rap is sometimes an illusion. It creates this illusion where you feel like, why wouldn't they be heard? But I think people listen, but they don't necessarily hear what's being said. And these texts are very rich, and they sort of are very political, but then the music is still marginalized. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's only in 2016 that the way that the SNEP, the Syndicat National of Music, that it recorded the way that songs sold and were classified from album sales to digital sales, and that completely changed which genre were seen as being the most popular, and hip-hop just catapulted. But it's still not played on mainstream media, except for people like Black M, who sort of, become this sort of acceptable figure of the other. But in terms of theme over time, at least in my time period, the themes just didn't change, the way in which they were engaging politically. And I think it shows that something hasn't changed. Like, they're being put into this sort of box of culture, and they're not being allowed to speak to politics, even though they're very political, because they are only and I think you mentioned this, they can only say what they say within the cultural sphere. So I think this idea of authenticity only exists within certain spaces and isn't allowed to sort of break into others.
Can I ask you a question? Can I jump in here? Something that I really loved about this panel is the methodological diversity that comes forth in your four approaches, and the different lenses of analysis that are possible in approaching rap. I think it's an extremely rich genre, and so one thing that I was thinking about and wondering if you're engaging at all in each of your projects is the music part. Rap is traditionally a type of music where there's a lot of sampling, and so there's a type of intermusicality, if we think of that as the musical response to intertextuality, and that kind of intertextuality I think is also an important aspect of the ways that rappers speak to one another in their lyrics. But I'm wondering how much you're engaging the music side of things, and if you're analyzing the sort of soundscape in the questions that you're posing.
On my larger project, I look a lot at the music, because it's really, I'm focused on theory, and so there's a lot of that goes into it. And I was thinking about a lot when Ali was talking, because of the differences in the sonic delivery of these sort of newer generation of rappers versus those in the 1990s. And you need to contextualize it within the beginning, what they were getting, I mean, rap comes out of Brooklyn, the Bronx in the 1980s, and that is what gets transferred to France. It's very, very early. There were 2 Frenchmen that were involved in actually the early days of American rap and hip hop. And so they bring it over to France in this with Dynasty, who was like kind of the first French rapper, anyway, it's very robust, the history and the connection between the American rap, the origins of rap in the United States and in France. And so the first rap concert that happens in France is Public Enemy. And so they have that very aggressive, very politicized, very pro-African American, very anti-establishment. And so I think that is just what was heard, and that kind of, I think, had a huge influence on who and what got said in those sort of beginning days. And then rap, like Léonard, for example, who is one of the first rappers, I mean, rap just like went off the map for a long time, and he sadly ended his life as a waiter in London, without any acknowledgement to his career as a rapper or what he gave in terms of poetry to France and the French language. And so, I think it's very important to think about the different sonic landscapes and the different influences. When we're talking about with social media, what are they listening to? What are people listening to globally? There's so much rap coming out of different Asian countries, different African. Now that we can all tap into those resources, I think it makes sense that we'd want to push the boundaries of this us versus them kind of thing that Ali was talking about. I think it's a very important piece of it.
I had to make a methodological choice because of the amount of textual material that I was analyzing. So my focus was definitely much more on the text, but I'm not a musicologist, so I didn't want to sort of wander into an area that I wouldn't then be able to analyze with any reasonable expertise. But I like to, there is a lot of sampling, and I like to think of them as sort of the footnotes in each song because they refer back to each other, and when you listen, then you pick up on it even without wanting to necessarily, and that happens now more and more across cultures as well, but I didn't focus so much on the musical aspect.
Yeah, I'm also like focusing much more like on the text, but I'm thinking about like how the sample is important also in like this it has never been like as important as it is like now. I'm thinking about MHD, who made like a whole kind of rap called like the Afro trap, borrowing from African samples. I'm thinking about Les Étoiles Vagabondes of Nekfeu as well, who tried like to travel around the world to collect samples from everywhere to kind of show that the fight is kind of transnational, going like to New Orleans, going to Japan, trying to collect like samples like to connect this kind of like fight against oppression and make it like a transnational fight. And the sample has been like very important like to them as well, and like the diversity of samples that have been used in the past couple of years is like something like that is like crucial in understanding this kind of like idiosyncratic identity that they're trying to create as well.
You could think as well as someone like Oxmo Puccino, for instance, who oftentimes would use like some kind of like traditional like French music with accordion and things like that. I'm thinking, for example, at Titi Parisien, and he has this really like relaxed flow on it. And I was also thinking about Kerry James, for instance, because I like to work on him, and how he used the beat to actually put the lyrics. I like the lyrics, and it's really a deep, kind of aggressive sometimes, and he jump on it and he says text, and it's really like powerful, and that's really like strike you like really like deeply inside.
Can I add one more thing? There's actually a website called Who Sampled This, because there's so much sampling across hip hop.
It makes me think of IM in the 90s too. The sample was so important to the message, right? When you talk about like when they're in their songs where they're talking about being of North African descent, you hear a lot of those tones or a wry kind of, and also who they do collaborations with. And now you see that like who does the collaboration with Vianney, the guy. He's like a chansonnier. I don't remember. It's Grims, yeah, that does. So they sort of like melding of different cultural references and collaborations. I think that, yeah, it's interesting.
Did not see the time. We are just about ready to close up. Oh, I'm so sorry. No, Caroline, vas-y.
Oh, sorry.
I didn't see you.
No, I'm just going to thank you all.
Okay, with you to take one more question?
I wanted to ask a question about music, actually, so that was perfect. I was going to ask a similar question, because I think Timothée, if I'm not mistaken, mentioned that Black M's last song did not quite qualify as rap, and so that was exactly where my opinion, and I might not be popular, Gims has not made rap music in a very long time, and yet he gets that he's a rapper. And so I was wondering, you know, as you rightfully pointed out, rap comes out of the Bronx. It's a very American, I mean, it's no longer American, but it's originally very American, and there's a tradition there that's specific in a way. And I was thinking perhaps in terms of politics, in France in particular, with the régionalisme, is it something, and it's a really candid question because I don't know and I don't study that or follow it closely enough, but American rap is characterized by its regional, I mean, you have West Coast, you have East Coast, you have Atlanta, and today Charlotte, right? So if you don't know the rappers from Charlotte, I highly recommend that you look into that. There's a lot of folks coming out of North Carolina, which is interesting, and it's very recent. And so I was wondering if, in what you've seen, because I know Nekfeu is not from Paris, for instance, and I was wondering if that comes out a bit more today, and if it plays out in those regionalism, and how that may affect the political stance in that music, if that makes any sense. Yeah, it might be a broad question, and maybe we don't have time for that, but I was interested in that question. Thank you. Oh, and I'm Caroline, and I'm from Davidson College.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the most recent project that has been like released called Le Classico, which like it's like a group project from Jules, the rapper from Marseille, who tried like to make a connection between Paris and Marseille in the album, but like also about like the many rappers reclaiming their identities as people from the province. Like we see like a real rap scene emerging in Toulouse as well, in the southwest of France. Marseille has been like the capital of rap, and like they're reclaiming their like Marseille identity throughout their songs as well. Parisian rap is like divided between like the different départements around, so like there is like this real reclaiming of the region through rap. Like there's like the rappers from the 9-1 are like very different from the rappers from the 9-3, and there is this kind of idea of like regionalism that developed into like the rap songs as well.
I'm not sure how it works politically or like an identity. I mean, it does seem to be that, I don't know if you think differently, that there's sort of not a homogenous idea at all, but that there is sort of this, everything is under this tension of belonging and not belonging to that sort of dominant French identity, more than like the regionality. I don't know.
I don't know about regionality, but you do have like the claiming where they're from, as Ali was saying. Like, for example, Ministère Amer, who's from Gare Charcel, they actually, I can't remember the postal code, but they actually named their first album with the postcode of Sarcelles. And you do have maybe like not group, but maybe crew who identify with some place. I can think in the 90s from Le Gang des Lyonnais, for instance. I remember that song from Al, who is a rapper from Dijon, who is now working with Cassé, and who is claiming like Le Lion vient de la Brousse or something like that. That's being from Dijon, it doesn't have access to to all like the musical scene that is produced mainly in Paris or Marseille, but oftentimes in the songs, like where they're from is like really mentioned and put forward. And also thinking about a different thing, but like you were talking about the origins, and I can think about the collective Bisso Nabisso, who are mostly rappers, and they're of Congolese descent. And they made an album together, maybe two, I don't remember, where they proclaim they proclaim their Congolese ancestry.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I'll just be very quick. No, it's very common in rap to state your postcode to locate yourself locally, but I think in France what really transpires, at least within my time period, is that there's a national imaginary that they're trying to speak to. So, and as you saw from the data, they're mostly collected around Paris, not just because they're from the Ile-de-France, but because that's where all of the machinery of the industry is concentrated. I think that's less the case now, as Ali was saying. So there's more regional identity coming through.
Please join me in thanking our fantastic panelists. This was really an amazing panel.